Kevin Barrett of Truth Jihad Radio, saying that John F. Kennedy opposed Israel's nuclear weapons program and got shot. If you oppose Israel's nuclear weapons program, please subscribe to Truth Jihad Radio. Go to truthjihad.com and click on the Subscribe at Substack button. And stay out of Dealey Plaza.
The key thing is, don't be inhaling, don't be ingesting.
Stay inside, don't drink or eat anything.
These are important questions.
I understand that. Highest moment the last 8 years.
Highest moment the last 8 years. Well, I think the most important, the most compelling was 9/11 itself.
Welcome to the live version of Truth Jihad Radio. I'm Kevin Barrett, broadcasting live every Friday evening from an undisclosed location deep in the woods of western Wisconsin, taking on all of the most suppressed hot-button issues that you're not allowed to talk about in polite company, the mainstream media, or pretty much anywhere else except on this show and a handful of others like it. I try to bring on the most interesting folks I can find who have an outside-the-box perspective on current events. And one of the most interesting, provocative, and important is my first-hour guest, Gordon Duff. Gordon is the senior editor at Veterans Today. It's a buzzing hornet's nest of ex-Intel types telling truths rarely heard before about all sorts of things, including nuclear terrorism. Are mini nukes being used for terrorist attacks like the Beirut port bombing?
Somewhere, I'm thinking.
That's the question that Gordon considers in his latest article. So, Gordon, can you hear me? We have Gordon on the line, and he doesn't seem to be able to hear me. I can see him, which is totally useless because it's a radio show. So let me see if I can tell Gordon to... Gordon, if you can hear me, turn off your camera and turn on your microphone. Because otherwise you're going to be in the silent movies. And they went out of fashion in about 1929. Okay, turn off camera. And turn on microphone. No, Gordon does know how to use Skype because I've seen Gordon running all kinds of interesting Skype calls.
Okay.
Putting me on Skype phone trees with former MJ-12 members and things like that. So he's a Skype whiz, and he's eventually going to figure this out. But probably what's going on here is that Gordon's got some new device that he hasn't figured out how to use yet. He's always picking up some fancy new device. He's like at least maybe a couple of dozen generations ahead of me. I'm still on my old 2015 MacBook Pro, but I can't even imagine what Gordon's probably on. Gordon, can you hear me yet? He's apparently can't. He's still putzing around.
Testing, 1, 2, 3. I've got microphone.
Yeah, we hear you, Gordon. Let me tell him we hear you. I
don't have speakers. They're probably screwed up.
He needs to find a way to get some speakers so he can hear us. On the other hand, we could just have a dialogue of the deaf where Gordon just rants on all of his obsessions. And I pretend to ask him questions. I try to stay one step ahead of his obsessive rants. That might be an interesting radio show, but it would be introduced as evidence that we're both crazy conspiracy theorists at our upcoming trial. So I don't think it's a good idea to do that. Gordon, can you hear me yet?
There, finally. I had my camera unplugged because I've been playing video games here and using the...
Aren't you too old for that?
No, I'm not.
Never too old for video games.
No, that's a $500 billion business. I'm playing one of the redone Call of Duty things anyway, where I'm running around in Eastern Europe shooting people.
Isn't that kind of what you used to do for a living?
Yeah, like what I used to do for a living. Yeah.
Reliving your lost youth in virtual form.
it's a lot easier and it's a lot more comfortable.
Yeah, well, maybe we should just put the entire intelligence community inside a giant video game and let them shoot it out.
You know, when I look at the intelligence community, and you know, and I would have to list on the edges of the intelligence community, I'd have to list Robert David Steele. And I was thinking about Robert today because he was staying here at the house. You stayed with me as well. We have one cat that loved Robert David Steele since he's gone. But he was like having a little kid stay at the house. You know, he's a hilarious guy. But when it was down to discussing, we spent hours discussing CIA operations here. You know, you're used to hanging around here with Carol and whatever. And for 8 years, it was very clear that during his time in the CIA, Robert was kept in the basement somewhere, or certainly not trusted. You know.
Well, they let him run a false flag operation.
Oh God.
Maybe it wasn't the biggest false flag operation in history. He's never divulged any details. He says it's classified.
Well, you know, it's all these people that don't divulge things. I had an email today from Microsoft telling me that the FBI has been monitoring my Skype account since March 2020, by the way. Now,
right. I think you mentioned that to me on Skype once, just as I was about to spill the beans about something very illegal.
I was figuring that because I'd gotten an email from Gene Khrushchev that had said that the FBI was monitoring his Skype account. Gene's a Russian diplomat. You know, so I figured they had me as well. But, God, what can I actually say here without doing anything bad? They'd gone to a judge with information they got from the Washington Post or whatever that said that all of us at VT were working for Russia, collecting the names of service people who applied for jobs through a job board run by some of the VT people back in California. And I don't even know those people, by the way. But they were secretly involved in, you know, getting names of people for the Russians so that they'd have names of people, or for whatever reason, you know.
A likely story.
Yeah, which was really silly. And instead, the FBI, I know, was monitoring us because the FBI wanted to hire us. They're doing a background check, you know, and, you know, whether they hired Gene or not, I don't know. I think he still works for the Russian government, as far as I know. Maybe you can work for both.
If he's working for the FBI, you better not tell the Russian government. And if he's working for the Russian government, you better not tell the FBI. And if he's working for both, you better not tell anybody. Well,
that's the whole thing. I have a good feeling that, you know, it's not just Robert Hansen and Pollard and that gang, but an awful lot of people seem to work for both. My issue with the FBI, and we had months of conversations about my specialty is counterintelligence, and you know, on that basis, you know, on the real world professional basis, I work on tradecraft and counterintelligence.
Yeah, you're like the American version of James Jesus Angleton, who was actually Israeli, but not you.
To an extent, yeah. You know, I do that anyway. And they don't have access to the people that you know either, for that matter. But they can't go into Syria and talk to General Ali Malouk, who's chief of security there. We're pretty good friends, you know, not that he wouldn't shoot me in the back of the head if it profited him, you know, that kind of friendship, the real world friendships. But you and I know an awful lot of people. I worked in a lot of countries, and I'm just a social person. So I've had dinner with just about everybody. I always get invited to stuff, but particularly for years I got invited to stuff because I worked for the defense groups under the Rodana, is the Swiss company that handles the money for the princes in the Middle East. It's the only real $1 trillion hedge fund is Rodana Investment, and I worked for Rodana.
You're working for Middle East princes. Oh man.
Well, the Saudis and the UAE and these camel driving assholes.
Yeah, a bunch of total scumbags, but I guess taking their money probably didn't bother you too much.
Oh, the kind of crap you'd get into. It is a typical request. Gordon, I was in Luxembourg. I left my wallet in a whorehouse in the bathroom, and I came back 2 weeks later, and it was gone. And it had $3 million in it. So, Gordon, I want you to go hire whatever former CIA or FBI director, as it was in this case, I want you to go hire that person, former judge, you think of the name here, $250,000 to hire him, to go threaten the people to get my money back. And about every other day, it's that kind of thing, Well,
at least they're not asking you to take a bone saw to somebody or whatever, but
yeah.
These people are completely crazy. I mean, at some point, didn't you start to kind of agree with radical Muslims like me that these hideous medieval regimes in the Gulf should be overthrown?
Well, my one friend in the Emirates was Falaknaz, who owns a lot of the stuff in Dubai anyway. He was a rug salesman, I guess, probably 40 years ago. The Dubai Sports Center and all those towers and that little island, he owns most of that stuff with investment partners. And every 3 or 4 years, he goes bankrupt, like Trump. I mean, he'll lose billions and billions.
You can make a lot of money going bankrupt.
They just give it back. But the deal was always with him and Maktoum, who had more money, who was funding Rudana, at least the part I work with, with the Damas and 4C control. And, but it was always involved in some kind of prank thing between these Arabs who all drive Bugattis, who pay $300,000 for a custom solid gold license plate, mind you, on a $500,000 car. But they were always pranking each other by short selling or screwing each other on stock options or whatever, but always multi-billion-dollar backroom deals, because they're just going to get the money back anyway, because they run the country and all the oil and everything else. And if they lose a few $1 billion, they just go pull it out of somewhere. I'm not sure where, but very little of it ever trickled down to stockholders. Very seldom did any of it trickle down, other than I probably spent over a period of years millions of traveling and eating and staying in really good hotels and stuff like that, which you would have obviously enjoyed. And when you were out traveling, visiting different companies or governments, and you represent money in its purest form out of the Gulf, you're at the front of the table with people, no matter what kind of dipshit you might be, even an American, But I miss that to an extent. And like today,
I can like just staying at the halfway decent hotels and meeting the really cool people who are plotting to take down all those jerks that you were working for. Like I had dinner with General Soleimani's daughter in Mashhad, for instance. These are the people I like. I honestly want nothing to do with those creeps you were working for, and I wouldn't take a penny from them, and I would risk my life to try and take them down and help out the folks who were trying to take them down.
Well, the kind of stuff we would do, we would be invited to London for meetings, and then there was always the London and the air show at Farnborough, where we were displaying our spy equipment and satellites and stuff like that. And Carol and I would generally get in the car and head out to the West Country, and we'd be, playing at archaeology. I don't know if you're a fan of Time Team, the British show, but I'm a big fan of that. Or taking pictures, or walking around in the middle of nowhere somewhere. Usually,
so what's Time Team, like Doctor Who does archaeology or something?
Exactly. Tony Robinson is the presenter for Time Team. It ran for more than 10 years. And they would show up in someone's backyard on an invite with a backhoe, dig up somebody's yard, knock down their garage. They had 3 days to find archaeology there, and they would come back with a bone fragment and a piece of Roman tile, and it would be a success, Time Team is a big deal to people in Britain. They just brought it back a couple of months ago.
I could see Monty Python doing the Time Team bandits and really knocking down people's houses. But Gordon, shifting this back to the despots in the Gulf that used to pay your bills, some of these Gulf despots are apparently paying for some pretty bad things in Lebanon, like covering up at least nuclear weapons and things like that. And that was this article that you wrote a while back and you updated recently. It's heading for 500,000 views, and that's the official views. The unofficial, maybe it's in the millions. You said many millions. So let's talk a little bit about that.
The video on my account has hundreds of thousands of views, but the video was originally in Farsi. And there's another version in Arabic. The Farsi version had 20 million views.
Yeah.
I just picked up my copy. You see 500,000 on my copy of it. My copy was pulled off, on television. In the Middle East, it was seen by everyone. One of the issues for people who aren't following Lebanon, a judge in Lebanon, and God, I like the food there. I like visiting Lebanon. I have a few friends there. You probably do too. There's a lot of neat stuff to see in Lebanon. It's a cheap place to stay. Nothing works there. The roads don't work. Everybody hates each other, and everybody from Lebanon lived in Detroit at some time. I found that out.
Yeah. I met a lot of Lebanese folks when I accidentally wandered into a Shia mosque on Ashura. I was just looking for a Friday mosque to pray in, and I happened to pick that one on that date. And a bunch of those people were of Lebanese origin.
Well, the Farhats, that's in Michigan, the powerful family that runs the Democratic Party. They're Lebanese. The Medawar family and their jewelry stores, which are everywhere. I've known them for 40 years, longtime friends. My neighbors, you live in Michigan. It's just loaded with Lebanese. But you go to Lebanon. I was there remember Franklin Lamb?
Yeah, you used to have a kind of a running thing going with Franklin Lamb, who was out there on the internet as a brave upholder of the Palestinian cause, had some sort of dubious aspects that you guys went over and met him, and then there was a big to-do around. I don't know if we want to go over all the details of that.
Well, because Franklin is allegedly dies anymore. I mean, people, instead of dying, I think, we believe they're all crisis actors anyway. All the COVID dead, certainly, 7, 8, maybe it's 1 million now, but they're all crisis actors. I'm absolutely
Wait a minute. Is this Fetzer or is this Duff I'm talking to here?
No, I'm going to be the Fetzer guy again.
Wait. Fetzer was hospitalized for COVID, and he still questions whether it's real because he's a philosopher, and, the ontological questions are always there,
Fetzer's a crank, basically. I like him. I find him funny, and we talk all the time still. We don't agree on anything, mind you, but I get a lot of material that heads his direction that I don't want, and I always send it there. So I maintain, and you and I don't agree on a pretty good number of things, and we still get along,
Yeah. Well, we're a little closer than either of us is to Jim Fetzer, I think.
Well, Fetzer's. My real point with Fetzer, and it's the same point. And we have Carol here. Carol, we had Steele here for days. And how much real CIA business, when tested out, did Steele really know?
Very little.
Very little. And
a lot of other stuff.
And we go to outings. If you know this, the old spy business has a lot of outings. The spy business they have clubs. God only knows, that, and you'd think they wouldn't have clubs, but it's clubs.
Well, you mean like retired CIA agent club? They have these.
Oh my God, yes.
Clubhouses? Like, are they tree houses or are they better than that?
Oh no, it's they actually have clubs and outings and bike runs and all this stuff, and I go to these things from time to time. And Carol goes along, And it's a pretty tedious group of people. The things that, the real end, and I went through days and days of this stuff with FBI people because they don't really understand much of it. I remember going through this stuff with Rocky Powerance, who was mayor at one point of Miami, but when he was in FBI, supervising in Miami, the 70s. There's always been a huge hatred for the Central Intelligence Agency, by the FBI. And the FBI...
Well, everybody hates the CIA.
Well, the point being is you have
reason.
one organization, the FBI, where they all work for Hoover, and Hoover probably worked for the mob,
Yeah. Meyer Lansky.
Meyer Lansky, pretty much. It was a pretty good guess that Hoover worked for the FBI and that the FBI was either was run by communists or Cubans, something, but they were never on our side. And then the CIA is built out of the OSS, and the OSS is built out of the Dulles Brothers Investments, which represented Adolf Hitler, and built out of what they called a Wild Bill Donovan or whatever, another ass-kissing Wall Street type. And
suspected Zionist British agent, wasn't he?
Pretty much they all were. But all of these people came out
of traitors and scumbags created our national police agencies.
Exactly. And the point being is that all of the spy agencies come out of varying forms of Freemasonry is the term. When we use the term Freemason here in the U.S., people think of folks in clown cars and fish fries and Friday night.
I like the little fez hats. I mean, that looks sort of like maybe Algeria and Morocco used to.
Yeah, Shriner guys. The Shriner guys. And they don't necessarily least. Freemasons have been around forever in the Middle East. There's nothing tied to Christianity and Freemasonry. This worship of Moloch, Baal, Baphomet, which is what the Freemasonry is based on, is quite a bit darker than Satan worship, well beyond that. But Freemasonry ties, this is where we found some very interesting things in doing research here at VT, because we collectively, most of us are trained researchers to an extent, you certainly are, and we're digging around to try to create, before we are all dead, which, I'm past my sell-by date, certainly, some sort of durable history that if somebody really gave a shit, they could figure out why we got where we are, which is not a good place, basically. And when we go back to Iberian Peninsula, it's always a good place to start. 1492, you've got two countries, Spain and Portugal, and they decide to throw the Jews out. In and around the same time, in the Basque area, they set up a group within the Catholic Church. The Jesuits, are suddenly created, and they begin let's say a mass slaughter of those who disagree with the church for whatever reason, as the Inquisition. But as we go into the background of who the Jesuits were, they seem to be from the exact same people that were expelled from because they were Jews. They just changed their religion to Catholic. They became Jesuits.
They're really the Jesuits.
They really and have run the Vatican and and that's Syria on there, passing on some kind of useless intelligence as well. But when we move to the 20th century and the issues with, let's say, Saddam as a Ba'athist or the Assad family, or if we look at Egypt under Sadat or Nasser, and to an extent even at Gaddafi, but we try to discuss those people as secular or socialist or whatever, And they're under the loose political issue of Ba'athist, and a Ba'athist is defined as an anti-Freemason. And the Freemasons ran the Ottoman Empire, from 1492 on, or whatever. 1468 is another date people wrote. When it was decided that the Jews that were thrown out of elsewhere were going to be useful to the idiots in the Ottoman Empire, because they had wiped out the Eastern Roman Empire over a period of 500 years.
Well, wait a minute, Gordon. If they ran the Ottoman Empire, why weren't they able to convince the Sultan to give them Palestine?
Well, when we look at you're going to the Balfour Declaration in 1917.
Right, but see, that was all necessary, because when they were leaning as hard as they possibly could on the Ottoman leadership to try to twist their arms and force them to hand over Palestine, in exchange for canceling all kinds of exponential debt, the Ottoman leadership said, "No way, over our dead body. We'll never give you Palestine. That's forever." And that's why they had to orchestrate World War I in order to take Palestine a different way.
Well, the point being is, though, let's go back to the Freemason Young Turks to Salonika, which is Thessalonica in Greece now. Yeah. 30,000 more Jews had settled in Thessalonica. It became the basic capitals of Freemasonry through the Ottoman Empire, but it also became the center, which, and of the group that came from there. Certainly, Ataturk was from Salonika and came.
These were all Sabbateans. They were followers of the false Messiah, the Satanist Sabtai Zevi.
So are we perhaps dealing with a situation that had arisen during the extreme decline of the Ottoman Empire after its occasional brushes with Britain and Russia, from 1870 on, the Crimean Wars and whatever, that, at the beginning of World War I, the Ottoman Empire was the sick man of Europe. It was the least capable, least survivable country. On the other hand, as the Anzacs learned at Gallipoli, however helpless Turkey was, you didn't want to take on the Turkish army mano a mano. They were enormously capable. But this Freemason empire that went together starting in the late 1400s in Genoa, Salonika, Venice, that moved into Germany, certainly set up in Swabia and Frankfurt, that took over Amsterdam, that built the Netherlands, and then later Britain into maritime powers, into policemen, into colonial powers, all to serve, what's turned out to be the history of the horrible West. Well, the history of the horrible West seems to have been written by Freemasonry that came out of these Sabbateans that we're discussing.
And let's back up here, Gordon, and reframe this a little bit in terms of the ideologies in the background. The Jewish Messianic ideology, which gave birth to Sabbateanism, which is a kind of satanic heresy, that the authentic Jewish version says the Messiah is going to be a Jewish world conqueror who will rule the earth from his throne in Jerusalem. And everybody's saying, next year in Jerusalem, we can't wait till the Messiah comes. That's just normal Judaism. Then along come people like Sabtai Zevi, and there were others as well, Abarbanel and so on, who said, well, we're going to be our own Messiah, which is the satanic view. and we're going to do it ourselves and spill blood and systematically violate the Ten Commandments, commit abominations, and be Satanists and become our own messiahs and take over Jerusalem and get on the throne in Jerusalem and rule the world that way. So those are the ideologies. Now, what is Freemasonry? Freemasonry is these Jewish millenarian messianic maniacs who have created a bunch of bullshit to brainwash primarily the Christians, but also some Muslims, into going along with this insane idea of going back to Jerusalem, tearing down the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the greatest and oldest Islamic architectural monument and spiritual monument, and building a blood sacrifice temple from which a one world government will take over the earth and be ruled by the so-called Jewish Messiah. Now, what do the Islamic and Christian scriptures say about this? They say that this so-called Jewish Messiah will be Antichrist. Okay, and the Jewish and Christian religions say that the real Messiah is Jesus, or Sayyidina Isa. And that's the true message from God is that in the end times, Jesus comes back. So the fight right now is between the forces of the Antichrist, who are allied with satanic Jewish heretics who created Freemasonry to sucker Christians into their bullshit about rebuilding the temple and Hiram the builder and yada, 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 versus the people of God.
We're dealing with these issues of rebuilding the temple at Baalbek in the Bekaa Valley, 35 or 40 miles out of Beirut. We're dealing with the same things in Palmyra, and we may be dealing with another one of the three new temples in Aleppo as well.
So these are all like blood sacrifice temples?
Well, blood sacrifice temples, but when we look at the West and how and people in the West who don't know their own history, which is everybody, if you've learned history or studied history at any level in university, you get stupider every moment. But one of the things Ian used to push at me here was Britain. The William of Orange was sent over 1701 to restore order in a color revolution, essentially, being William of Orange, the name itself.
I guess that's the first color revolution.
It may have been the first color revolution. That the British theoretically owed unnamed continental banking groups of some kind, which later we may have expressed under the name Rothschild, but at that time we weren't moving that name around much. The Rothschilds were not in the position that they were in another 100 years. But the British owed 15 million guilders. 40,000 people were sent over. Mercenaries were sent over by Britain. They put a new government in, and then set up the Bank of England and brought the Jews back. And Britain was built into a wonderful colonial power. Certainly took a strong position in the New World with what we know as establishing this country, the United States, as Lower Canada, which I like to think of us as. And as the U.S. was built as well, and this is one of the issues we run into with the Federalists, where almost all of the people involved in the U.S. Revolution, the American Revolution, were all Freemasons. But there's this special coloration within the Federalists that ties to the Sabbateans.
And by Federalists, are you talking about today's Federalist society that's infiltrating the judiciary, or are you talking about the original Federalists as opposed to anti-Federalists?
They're built on one's built on the ashes of the other. Mm-hmm. Was Hamilton, the child of the Caribbean, and certainly Washington supposedly were always told that Hamilton was my greatest soldier, and someone murdered by what was then Vice President Aaron Burr, but the key issue with Hamilton had always been a bank, but had always been to maintain those ties with with Britain that were going to survive a revolution. That was because the idea was never to build a strong Britain at all. That was never the point of the people who ran the Bank of England.
Any more than the point is to build a strong America.
It was to build an America and a Britain and a France of failed states that could be kept in eternal war with each other, and that one or more could be deployable, where the banking enforcers needed a navy to show up to conquer India or to bully the Chinese, with the Britain's open door policy, the Hayes-Farnsworth Treaty or whatever, that we were always the bully boys, certainly in 2 world wars, for this same criminal gang.
And so how does this relate to the apparent Israeli nuking of Beirut, which has been so assiduously covered up by pretty much everybody except veterans today?
And this for me, and we have this, what's the day's popular conspiracy theory? With Fetzer, it was the school where the kids at the school never existed. It had been closed years before, and the kids never existed. And maybe some of the things Fetzer said were true. Not all of them. Not enough of them is the problem. But some of them were.
So, some of them were highly outrageous and highly improbable on their face, such as the school being closed.
Yeah. But on the other hand, there were red herrings thrown in. You have FBI agents that are walking around with reporters behind them. They're speaking Hebrew to each other. It was a game.
So I suspect you're leading us from the red herrings that obscured the reality of Sandy Hook and led Jim Fetzer down the wrong rabbit hole, and the similar kinds of events around the authentic videos of the apparent Israeli nuking of Beirut, where all sorts of strange videos were strewn around to mislead people and to discredit the authentic videos.
Well, in the issue with the authentic videos, I have an 18-minute video which you can connect up to something here. I've got it. It's on YouTube, and they've left it on there.
Really?
It's still on there, and I've got one on BitChute, and then Press TV's got one on theirs. It was done for Nader. That night, I had gotten a call within minutes, and the call I got was from a general in Lebanon with their defense ministry, and he said, "This is what I was told before anybody knew anything happened at all. The Israelis just attacked us. They fired a nuclear-tipped missile from an F-16 into the port and destroyed much of the city." Okay. And he sent me a video, and it was within 20 minutes of the attack. I received a video. Within the next hour or two, I got 4 or 5 more. And these videos showed, I still have some of them around, but they're being hunted down like renegade Roman slaves. This is the Spartacus thing. I'm the one that found the missiles in the video. Nobody put missiles in the video and sent those photos around. The cloud was still hanging over town. No one knew what hit them. I had a video here. I ran it frame by frame, and God only knows a missile shows up in it. I found it. Nobody else found it. I found it. I pulled the frames out. I color enhanced them. I put them on Corel, which is a lot easier to use for computer idiots than Adobe Photoshop, I might add. Mm-hmm. That's way better.
Yeah, I did my first book with Corel, by the way. My first book was The Weird Tour Guide to San Francisco. I did all the maps of all of the neighborhoods of San Francisco in Corel Draw circa 1993.
Yeah, and I still use Corel Draw. I've got a somewhat later version, obviously, but it allowed me to manipulate the colors and to bring out a lot more detail than was otherwise there in the video. But once I pulled the frames out, but no one created any of the things in the frames. And then the next day I saw the same videos I had, my video taken by CNN, and CNN went in and took out the 3 frames that had the missile in it and said that was the original. It was 3 frames shorter than the version I had. Obviously.
This sounds like what somebody did to the Zapruder film.
Exactly. And so they're showing my film without the video. Then we have this other video. I've got a number of others. One, I've got a couple sitting in an apartment talking. And this was sent directly to me, not picked up anywhere else. I have the original. I have them sitting on a file. I'm looking over there. Camera's here. I've got 2 computer screens over there, so that's my tendency to look to the left. But I've got a couple sitting in an apartment, and they're watching Israeli planes flying around. And you can hear the planes. And then one of the planes comes right over the apartment building. And there's already a fire down there. That's why there's a small fire, and like a dumpster fire, already down in the waterfront. An Israeli plane comes right over, F-16, and they're screaming, no, 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 and then poof, white flash, kablam, and the whole building moves. The plane, you could see the plane going over, you could see it go in, you couldn't see it fire a missile, but those planes later no longer existed. I have the videos with the planes flying around. I have several. Lots of people took videos. We have another video that was just a street cam, a 4K street cam, nice street cam. People are walking around the street and they're watching the planes, and they're standing here like this. And then they're watching them come in. You want to see people doing this. And then they're watching it come in for attack. And then all of a sudden, these people are picked up and slammed against a wall. The point is they're over 2 kilometers away, and they're picked up and slammed into a wall.
This is a heck of an explosion.
Then we find other things that just I look at, little things where, and you know Beirut, I know Beirut. It's a nice town, by the way. It's one of the few.
Well, I can't say I know Beirut. I know people from Beirut. I've never visited Beirut. I've been invited. Last time I was invited, I couldn't go because the FBI said I would be arrested the moment I stepped off the plane when I came home.
I get that occasionally, and now the people that interrogated me, if I'm stopped, I just tell people that they're my FBI handler, and then they have to call them up. And it's just so much bother for everyone that it's.
Maybe I should have done that. I never did the full interrogation with the FBI guy, because I told him I wouldn't do it unless I could record it, because I don't want them taking stuff out of context. And his boss said he couldn't talk to me if I recorded it, so I never had that conversation with him. But from what you're saying, maybe I should have just talked to him, and then from then on just told everybody, hey, that guy's my handler, so this is all totally authorized. I can go anywhere I want.
The first crew that came after me, and it's years ago, this was back when they'd first gone after Michael Flynn. And they were figuring that I was involved with Flynn because the Russians had asked me sometime in probably 16 or so. I was invited to set up a veterans group that could travel to Russia and meet with Russian veterans, and we could discuss our common interests. And the Russians were setting it up, and it was to be run by Mike Flynn and me together.
Whose idea was this?
I don't know, but if somebody told me it was a Russian spy agency, I'd consider that possibly the source of that. But yes, it came from Russia.
Somebody in Russia.
Yeah, somebody, a friend there, And
VT's attitude is we just want to promote dialogue among interesting people from all over the world, right?
My attitude is I wanted a free trip, a really good hotel room, and then I wanted to visit. I had museums and things I wanted to do in Russia. And if they would do that, I'd go with Mike Flynn. I'd dump him as quickly as possible. And then at some point during the trip, Mike Flynn and I would probably be on one of those bathroom breaks together. And Mike Flynn would get to try out some of that unarmed combat training that the Army had given him.
Uh-huh. Yeah, you don't seem to really see eye to eye with Mike Flynn.
No, I would have probably slapped him around a bit. And I'm enormously.
That would have been interesting. That'd probably go viral on YouTube. If you ever decide to slap Flynn around, be sure and invite me, and I'll bring my camera.
I given a chance, I'd do it again. Mike likes to watch it. Don't mean anything bad here, but the first FBI guys, I was down in Toledo, and Carol was there. I was outside the house. Two guys came up, and I said, what the hell? I'll talk to these guys. So we went and walked around for a while, about 2.5 hours. And these were the guys that they just left Flynn. And they said, well, we were told that you were going to be just like Flynn. And he said, you're okay. And this is a quote from, it was the head of FBI counterintelligence. Gordon, Flynn's a dick. The issue is the counterintelligence guys actually got to like him. And the guys who ran counterterrorism out of the Cleveland office. I've had them over. We've had meals together and stuff. They're basically sort of okay, and we have to measure that. How do you maintain a job with the FBI when we look at the huge failures? The FBI is supposedly here to protect the United States from all the things that have already happened to the U.S. We've got Supreme Court justices that clearly work for organized crime. We've certainly got the Israelis that they run a significant part of this country, but they did under Hansen and the FBI years ago. They've been doing it for a long time. And
well, it would have been nice if the FBI nailed the Israelis for 9/11.
Oh, I have a wealth of materials. The materials I got in 2014 that, I went through with Fetzer and gang when we were all working together and playing nice. We learned that those materials that I received came from a dissident FBI agent who had sued the FBI after they put a bolo out on him and tried to have him killed. That's Special Agent Mike Dick. And during one of my interrogations, and I took Carol to one just because it was, Carol, how much fun was it watching me being interrogated for hours by the FBI?
It was fun.
How do I do?
Fine.
Yeah. So what I brought,
good woman.
Yeah. So what I brought,
shout out to Carol.
If people want to eat, you bring them food. So I brought them a bunch of CIA classified material, some of it horrifically embarrassing to the United States, I admit, proving our complicity in war crimes and other things. But I brought it along and offered to give it to them. And it was pretty much like I pulled out a backpack and put a 30-pound spider on the table, displeased. And then we had this talk about Mike Dick and 9/11 and the documents, and we've never heard of Mike Dick. And I pulled up, I had a laptop, so I pulled up the lawsuit of Mike Dick, Special Agent Mike Dick. He was also a U.S. Army colonel, by the way. And Mike Dick was the individual that ran the investigation of Israeli nuclear weapon use after John O'Neill left the FBI. John O'Neill's the FBI agent that was killed in 9/11.
And here we're seeing the tie-in to Beirut, this issue of alleged Israeli mini-nukes, 9/11, Beirut, maybe where else? That Bali bombing, maybe the Hariri assassination.
See, at Bali, that was the Soviet Union had an investigative group called the 12th Directorate, which investigated. There are two separate worlds here. The world of imaginary people, like the one we're all supposed to be part of, where nobody uses nuclear weapons because it's horrible TV, except every other TV show somebody's stealing a nuclear weapon, building a dirty bomb, putting it in a vending machine, blowing this. Every third TV show is about stolen nuclear weapons, So I met that this was Kalazov, Dmitry Kalazov, so many years ago. Kalazov believed that somebody had recovered a Russian nuclear cruise missile and used it to attack the Pentagon on 9/11. And he was told that by people within Russian security, and that nuclear weapons were used to bring down the towers on 9/11, but that those weapons were built into the towers in 1964 or whatever, when they were initially built. And I don't know that to be the case. There are nuclear weapons you can leave that long that may still work, and that would be gun-type U-235 weapons. Don't need a lot of updating because they don't have booster gas. They don't use plutonium, which breaks down 239 to 240, very quickly. The tritium gas would have destroyed through embrittlement, H3 gas, many of the components of the bomb. So it would have been possible to do this, but unbelievably unlikely, like it would have been unlikely to have the 10 to 20,000 people stripping the towers down and coating them with nanothermite and 9-volt batteries.
And just as it would be unlikely to have a big warehouse full of fertilizer blow up in such a way as to look like a nuclear explosion in Beirut.
And so one of the things I dug up, just as my slam dunk, and their KISS is important. Keep it simple, stupid. The European Union has a label that they require on all ammonium nitrate fertilizer. And that safety level says that don't let it catch fire because it may cause fumes, but it can't burn. And that it can put out noxious gases, and don't try not to get it wet, but that it can't burn, can't explode under any circumstances. There's very little care warning about this. So the idea initially, the reporting on Beirut after I released my report, it was claimed that 27,000 tons of fertilizer, and if you knew Beirut, I could probably break into a car dealership, Mercedes dealership preferably, in Beirut and steal all of the cars in a night and not get caught. There isn't a lot of police, not a lot of law and order.
You could probably make more money doing that than you made from working for those sheiks from the Gulf.
Oh, yeah, they never pay their bills. There's collecting owed money from Arabs is not easy to do.
Okay, so Beirut has lousy security.
Yeah, so let's
the
take
cover
that.
story is 30,000 pounds of not handful, but just fertilizer.
Tons. That's
tons.
You
I'm sorry.
understand? This is an entire shipload. First of all, 27,000 tons. Let's look at a ton. A ton is a bag. It actually comes in a bag. A ton bag is about so big. Okay, 6 feet by 6 by 8 by 6 by 6 is a ton of ammonium nitrate. And 27,000, and it can't be stacked, by the way. You can't stack bags like that. It's just one at a time. Now, the issue would be if you want to sit down and do the math on this, you can take the size of the building, you can take 27,000 tons, realize you can't double stack this, and realize that the entire port area wasn't big enough to handle 27,000 tons of fertilizer. Not that building. The building can hold about 800 tons of fertilizer, not 27,000, 800. Zeros missing here.
So this is a really lame cover story.
Lame cover story. Now, ammonium nitrate can explode. Let's take this scenario for ammonium nitrate. And
we only have about a minute and a half here, so we're going to have to get
God, I was hoping I'd have like hours. Anyway, to explode ammonium nitrate, you need to do this, and I'll do the extent. You would have a hydrocarbon, fuel oil, even wax. It's a hydrocarbon. You would need a powdered metal substance, and I'm not going to mention which metal it is, but one that would be used for making a thermitic compound.
Starts with an A.
Yeah, and in order to make that hole, you would have to drill holes about 80 feet into the rock around there. You would have to put carefully mixed, blended ANFO. And I can't tell you how to make it.
Use a wearing blender. You put the fertilizer in there, 2 cups of fertilizer, 1 cup of fuel oil, and you turn on the blender. Then you pour that out. You do it again and again and again and again until you have enough to blow up the cork.
It has to be exploded with TNT. Well, as part of that process now, when their initial story in the fertilizer failed, they came back and saying, well, we had 4 or 5 barrels of oil in a building next door.
Oh, there you go.
When that didn't work, and we had some of the other materials were just across the street. I call it the cake mix scenario.
Gordon, long story short, this is such an insane cover story, but if anybody goes and protests this and supports the honest investigation and protests against lies, they get shot by snipers.
Yeah, just like it was made on again. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So this was like pro-Hezbollah demonstrators who were calling for an honest investigation into the Israeli nuking of Beirut, and then suddenly snipers are mowing them down.
So only in this country do people, and according to our media, do people believe the fertilizer story. And the point is, you can go to your garden store, you can buy ammonium nitrate, and hit it with a blowtorch, do whatever you want.
There you go. I mean, major American cities will be going up in fireballs due to the farmers with their fertilizer. Okay, well, Gordon Duff, it's always good talking to you and cutting through the BS on some of these things. So I appreciate your good work. Keep it up. We'll talk again.
If we're entertaining people, that's all that matters.
I guess.
Nothing's more important than that.
Okay, take care. It's Gordon Duff, senior editor of Veterans Today. This is Truth Jihad Radio. I'm Kevin Barrett. Back in the next hour with a couple of freedom activists and writers. Kat McGuire is the activist and Tessalina is the writer. Kat's going to talk about COINTELPRO in the freedom movement, so stick around for that.
When the sons of God came